Welcome to today's lessons for getting your land legs. I'm doing a series of lessons on Mondays to help men and women who are either considering correcting their political status so they can come back to their birthright political status as an American, as they truly were intended to be from the beginning, or for those who may be interested because they came to what they thought was America and they became US citizens thinking that they were Americans and they thought they were here to live out the American dream and quickly figured out that it wasn't quite what they had hoped for all their lives. And so many people are realizing what has happened and that there's something terribly gone awry. For those who do want to look into that, there is a free book here called You Know Something's Wrong When. It's on the education page of the TASA website. And you can just read that. This is actually a PDF that you can download and read. You can also order it on Amazon or other places. The store for TASA, there's a link for a store right here, and you can purchase it there. But I'm going to go to talking about some topics where we often refer to this chart. This is what I refer to as the one-page structure of the American government. There's another version of this. If you come to this TASA website and you go to right here, there's a link that says Handbooks. And this chart is in the Handbooks area because it helps when people are reading about the American government and some of the things about our Reconstruction efforts to bring back our state governments and our state assemblies. And so it's right here. The one that I have on the screen is actually a little bit of a different version. I like this one because there's not quite as much information, so it's less overwhelming. When people go to see this one, there's so many words on this page that it can just get overwhelming and confusing. But there's a little bit easier version I use sometimes for teaching about this. And so what I wanted to talk about today is often Anna says that when people say to her something about the Constitution, she will say back to them, well, which Constitution? And so many of us that are here already know that there are 3 constitutions and that they were written in 1787, 1789, and 1790. But the average man and woman out there, or many of us were there just months or a few years ago or within the last year or something, we didn't really know that there were 3 constitutions, the first one being written in 1787, the next one in 1789, and the next one in 1790. And so when someone says the Constitution, we're not used to the idea, and US citizens are not used to the idea that there was actually 3 constitutions. For one thing, we tend to think of the Constitution as something that's going to cover us like an umbrella and keep us safe, and it's going to protect us from things that shouldn't be happening to us, right? It somehow gives us our rights and it protects our rights. That's the concept that we have. It's actually, when you're an American, there's actually guarantees within the Constitution that guarantee the way that you're to be treated and you're to be protected. And so it's actually not the rights. So we begin to see that there's something more going on here than what we've been told. And one of the clues is when someone will say the Constitution. So there's so much information out there on the internet, whether it's BitChute videos, Rumble. I'm trying to think of all the different platforms, that are alternative that people might put information on, and all these different patriot groups and people wanting to, we have Trump talking about making America great. What does that even mean? Make America great again? And eventually you'll learn why Trump can't really do that. It's really up to you and me, and we're linking arms to do it. And so the idea of there being one constitution, when someone, from our upbringing, or someone from a YouTube video, or someone when we were being raised in school, and they would say the Constitution, that is deceptive because it didn't actually teach us about the founding of America. Anna has said that when she was in school, which was before 1975, that before 1975, there was a subject called American history, and there was another subject called US history. And in American history, it would have been taught that there were 3 constitutions and what those were and what a constitution was. And if you want to learn more about that, there's some YouTube videos on my YouTube channel, Status Assist, or there are also some videos on my BitChute channel. I'll try to link those below, where you can learn about the 3 constitutions and how the American government was set up. The purpose of what I want to do today is to help clear up the confusion when someone says the Constitution, why Anna says back to them, which Constitution, and that there's 4 very important constitutions that we need to be aware of. And so I'm going to grab, hold on, I have to move this. Okay. I'm going to come to article 4091. This is an article that Anna wrote on March 28th of 2023. As we're recording this, this is the summer of 2024, July 8th. And so this article is over a year old, not quite a year and a half. And this is called The Constitution as a Red Herring. And it says further evidence and historical supporting material sent to H.E. Cardinal Mamberti and the Vatican Chancery Court in regard to our claims on March 6th of 2005, January 19th, 2023. So one thing to know is that Anna has been serving due notice to the major international principles for, since at least March 6th of 2025. If you go to the education page again, we can see, I'm going to X out of this, go back up to the top here, and you can find all of the writings that went to the Vatican Chancery Court right here, the presentments before the Vatican Chancery Court. And the important thing about that is that she's been serving due notice, and what many people don't realize, some people, there's this rumor about her being a Vatican agent, and there's a lot of confusion behind that. And I'd be happy to explain that to anyone that wants to, interact with that later, if that would be helpful. But when she's writing to the Vatican Chancery Court and she's interacting with the Pope or different officials from the Vatican or the Catholic Church, it has to do with the fact that they're intimately involved in what's happened in America. And so anyways, it says that, and then she says the Constitution as a red herring. Red herrings are used as lures in certain fisheries to entrap schools of herring, and sometimes they're predators too. But the slang implication of a red herring is a distraction or a non sequitur issue brought forward to obscure the actual facts or prevent discovery of evidence. So essentially, she's pointing out that when we were all raised with this idea that there was the Constitution, we were prevented from learning about the 3 constitutions, and it also makes it difficult for us to share with those people that we want to share with that the entire situation in America is so different than they could imagine that there's a lot of learning to take in. And so anyways, it's a distraction, and it prevents people from getting the actual facts or prevents people from discovering the evidence. The same concept is presented by the rabbit hole phenomenon, in which people are led to endless wild goose chases by having their attention focused on material that isn't actually part of the topic they're trying to explore. There's so much information out there on BitChute and Rumble and YouTube and I don't know, all kinds of platforms that you can really go down so many ways. She's calling rabbit holes here that you can spend all your time and sometimes later figure out, like, wait a minute, that wasn't actually a presentation of a fully honest thing there. That you'll later come to realize that perhaps there was a lack of full disclosure that was part of that. So our federal employees are constantly focusing all attention possible on the Constitution as a means of preventing more appropriate discussions. You see, if we're focused on the Constitution, then we're not having the conversations we need to have. She says this is because the federal employees are ultimately all dependent on one or another of the constitutions to provide them with power and paychecks. And if the constitutions are overturned, they are left with no basis of authority and no money. As a result, the constitutions are of supreme and vital interest to our federal employees, but not to us. So we don't actually need to harp and harp and harp on the constitutions, right? When someone comes along to our assemblies and they're very focused on the constitutions, we know that they are in the process of getting up to speed, and they're going to be learning a lot, just like there was a time when we thought the Constitution was premier and center stage and all of that. The actual Americans who are not federal employees and are not federal dependents. Now, again, a federal employee means that you would be working for one of the government service employers, and a federal dependent would be someone who is in some way, shape, or form, maybe a ward of the state or dependent, or maybe a spouse works for the military or something like that, and not dependent upon any of the constitutions for our basis of authority or source of money. So as Americans, we do not go to the constitutions for our authority, or we're not getting paid. In fact, we're on the paying side of the constitutions, and are more concerned than the federal employees honor their obligations under the Constitution that applies to them. So what we want them to do is do what we hired them to do. I like to talk about if there was like a condo unit with 13 condos in it, I like to make that analogy with the 13 colonies. And the condo units had someone they paid to come and mow the yard, mow the grass. The people that come and mow the grass, if they're asked to do it once a week in the, the most, the warmest season of the year or whatever, and the company only came every other week, or if they were asked to edge, I don't know, once a month, I'm not sure what would be appropriate, for that. And anyways, it's like, if we had the agreement and then we were going to pay money, we would just simply, if they weren't doing a good job, we would say, you're not doing a good job. So we, the people, hired this, like, let's pretend this government service provider that was going to mow the yard. And when they don't mow the yard, what we've been taught to do is get picket signs and go out there and march and hold these signs and say, we don't like the way you're mowing the yard. But really, as Americans, we have a different way that we approach it. We're in authority. And so we simply say, course correct, or you're fired. And part of what's happened is because hey, Johnny, I'm just going to tell you that Liz is, she's done her paperwork. She's on Washington. So anyways, thank you so much for checking. So the constitutions are important they're more important to our employees because it's how they're getting paid, and it gives them some level of power. But to us, what really gives us our standing and our authority is more that we have this unanimous Declaration of Independence. And because of that, we actually have something called unalienable rights. And I pulled this up. This is something I found a long time ago on the internet called Your Unalienable Rights. And there's a website called Living in the Private. There's some great information on there. Always check with someone who's experienced and knowledgeable and committed to reconstructing the American government before you take any advice on living in the private, because we do things differently, but there's still a lot of really great charts and helpful information on that website. But this is called Your Unalienable Rights. In fact, I'm going to put this in the chat real quick for those of you who are here. Okay, and so I wanted to point out that as Americans and someone with unalienable rights, you can look, there's more down here, but I'm going to just make this a little bit bigger. And it says that we have, this is an important one that we don't often realize, the right to contract or not contract, which is unlimited. These corporations are forcing us into contracts. They're not honoring this unalienable right. And we're free to go ahead and contract if we want to, like I needed to open a post office box. And in order to do that, I have to go into the C jurisdiction because everything's set up in the C jurisdiction in commerce. And so in order to even open a post office box, I had to go into commerce. So we can go and contract when we need to, and then we can choose to only limit ourselves to that. We don't have to be forced into having a driver's license and voting in their elections and all of that kind of stuff. But also we have the right to due process of law, which if anyone knows someone, which most of us know someone on our state who is being hassled by the courts, they are failing to give due process. Also, in the process of standing up our states, we absolutely have to learn what due process is because we have not grown up with it. And when we create our courts, we need to make sure that we are honoring unalienable rights and that each man and woman is they have the right to due process of law with notice and opportunity to defend. So we need to make sure that we're setting up our courts in a way that's consistent with that and not just repeating a different kind of, thing. So anyways, I think it's important to understand what our unalienable rights are. And these are not what we've come to think of as human rights and civil rights and those kind of things. The right to control and hold one's property lawfully without trespass. So anyways, you can look at this more later, but I just wanted to point out the way that this, kind of looks is we're much more interested in our unalienable rights. And the reason we have those unalienable rights or unalienable rights, you can say it either way, is because we have superior concurrent jurisdiction. It took me a long time to really wrap my head around what is general jurisdiction. I'm sorry, we have superior concurrent general jurisdiction. The important words here being general jurisdiction, and then we have the modifiers of superior and concurrent. But we need to understand what general jurisdiction is, as sometimes people don't understand. I like to explain that when you're driving down the road and maybe a law enforcement officer pulls you over and the idea that they're operating under is that they think they have general jurisdiction. In their mind, they're like, look around. What other police officers do you see? We're the law enforcement here. Can't you tell we're in charge? Like, why do you think that you don't have to do what I say? The thing in their mind is, I'm driving on the roads here and I'm here to create safety and security, or at least that's the, illusion, traveling, right? Traveling. Thanks, Johnny. And the police, the law enforcement officer, in his head, he actually thinks that the people that he works for are the actual government, but he doesn't. He doesn't work for the government. He just works for a corporation. And the way that we know that the corporation is not the actual landowner is because corporations do not own land. So the corporations that have a Dun and Bradstreet number cannot possibly, they can't own the land. All they can do is what they've done and make up this whole fiction that they own the land. But think about this, when the law enforcement officer pulls you over, he doesn't even have the word for general jurisdiction. But what he's thinking in his head is, I'm the one here with general jurisdiction. Don't you know? Like, look, I'm driving around on these roads and I'm pulling over people that are driving. Yes, we should use the word travel. But this is what's going on in his head. He thinks that he has general jurisdiction. He thinks that who he works for owns all the land. So anyways, that is general jurisdiction. So let's say that you own 10 acres and there's a group of teenagers that decide to come like onto your land and maybe have a paintball, war or something. And they're on your land. They don't have permission to be there. And you can tell them to leave because it's your land. You have general jurisdiction, like you're the one that gets to make the rules. So if you wanted to say to them, sure, you can come on my land and do paintball, but it's going to cause a degree of damage. And so I'm going to charge you $300 and you can hold an event here or something, right? But you're the one that owns the land. And if you want to contract about your land in that way, you're free to, but they're not free to just come on your land. You're the one that has jurisdiction. You own the land. It's yours. If you own, like let's say, let's set aside the idea of land patents, right, for a minute, because that's a whole bigger topic. But let's just say you live in a neighborhood and you live on the street of all these other neighbors and you have your little plot that's your house and your yard and whatever. And someone wants to come in the house and use the bathroom and you don't even know this person. You don't have to let them in your house. They don't have any jurisdiction. You have jurisdiction over it and you make the rules about who gets to come in and use the toilet and who doesn't. So when it is, your land, when you own a land, let's say it was like ideally like you had a land patent, you actually owned it. And let's fast forward a year or 2 years or 5 years when we've actually reestablished what needs to happen for that to be honored on a consistent basis. And let's say that you wanted someone to come onto your land and mow your yard because, it used to be that when you were, young and married and you just bought the house, you didn't have as many responsibilities. You weren't chasing around 3 kids, 5 and under. You didn't, have 2 jobs, and maybe you're also now building the American government. Your time is so limited. So now you're hiring out the mowing of your yard because you're just juggling so many different things, right? The kids are in sports, whatever. You just have a lot going on. So now you hire it out. You can do it yourself. And we did that in the beginning of our country as Americans. And when we were able to, we went ahead and hired out the mowing of our yard or different services we wanted contracted. So when we hired out mowing the yard, I'm just using that as an example, we gave permission to come onto our land in the same way that we could give the teenagers permission to come onto our land. Or if we wanted to, and someone was walking down the street and said, I have to go to the bathroom so bad, I'll pay you $20 if I can use your bathroom. And you're like, that sounds like a good deal to me. I'll do that, right? And you felt like they weren't going to be dangerous or something, right? I mean, we get to decide when we're on the land what the rules are, and that's called general jurisdiction. So imagine that this piece of land isn't just 10 acres or not just a small little plot within a neighborhood, but the land that we're on is actually a massive, massive estate. And let's pretend back in the day it was a Maine. That was an estate. Or it was Pennsylvania. It was a huge land mass. It was an estate. And when you drop off the E, you have the word state. And the men and women that were on that state, and anytime a child was born on that state, they were on the land. And those who were born on the land and had the land and owned the land have general jurisdiction. Then when we hired the Navy, that was the second Constitution, the second agreement in 1789, we said you can be here, and we gave stipulations and definition to that. And we had an agreement about that. We also had something called the Residence Act of 1790, where we said that the Tories, that's the British territorials. So the shortened version of British territorial, because the word territory has Tory in it, the British territorials were called Tories, and they were known to not be Americans. We always had more than one population on the land of America. So the Tories were here with permission. Because they were here with permission, in the same way that you might hire someone to mow your yard, they were allowed certain abilities, but it was never mistaken that they owned the land and had general jurisdiction. They had a limited type of jurisdiction. So that's why there's a jurisdiction, and that's why the concurrent. So remember, we have superior, concurrent, general jurisdiction. We have general jurisdiction. We can also share jurisdiction with them. That's called concurrent jurisdiction. But when push comes to shove, we have superior, concurrent, general jurisdiction. So I think that's important to kind of like understand how all those pieces come together. And so coming down here, continuing in this article 4091, Anna says, although our federal employees have an obnoxious habit of referring to the constitutions as if there were only one such document, there are actually 4. quote unquote federal constitutions that may be referenced. So there is the Constitution for and it's a lowercase u. United is simply describing that the states of America were united. Also notice in this name that it's for, it's not of. So the first Constitution had the preposition for included, whereas the next two had the preposition of. The Constitution of and then the name of that corporation was United States of America. That's the British territorial business that was here to, protect us on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. And that was in 1789. That created the British territorial government and the Constitution of the United States. United States, when that's the name of the business we're referring to, is referring to the papal municipal. That was in 1790. In addition to these three venerable constitutional agreements, there's a fourth so-called corporate. I put the word doppelganger here. There's a so-called corporate constitution used by the British territorial government, issued by the British territorial government in 1868. This constitution was foisted off, that's why I put doppelganger there, as a quote unquote a constitution. It was without full disclosure to the American public. This undisclosed charter for a Scottish commercial corporation infringed upon our good names, our trademarks, our copyrights. They are using our names and words in semantic deceit in order to trick their employers. In effect, they stole our identity in order to improperly access our credit. This continues to be circulated even though the Scottish usurper went bankrupt in 1906. Listen, well, I'm going to go back first and explain a little bit about this because it might be confusing to be thinking about this fourth constitution because this one is different. So in order to explain this one, I'm bringing up this kind of chart that I found a couple years ago that I thought was really helpful. It's called Hierarchy of Laws. So I love this chart. We can always, maybe sometime go over this chart and do even a whole teaching on a lesson on this. But universal laws deal with energy's main principles. Whatever energy you put out must come back to you. I think of this like the law of sowing and reaping. If you show up with the expectation of a positive outcome, it's more likely it's going to be positive. I mean, there's just all kinds of things where when you bring forth your energy, you're bringing that into the world and you're impacting the future by creating the future that you want. Then we have natural laws. These deal with the natural ways of all objects and beings which have manifested in the third direction. I found a fantastic website on natural laws. I think there's 7 natural laws and an 8th one that unites them all, or 6 and a 7th one that unites them all or something. There's a fantastic website. We could go there sometime and do a lesson on that. There are laws of maxims or maxims of law, and these are known as God's laws. I think of these like wise sayings. If you want to study law, I recommend going to Bouvier's and just reading maxims. We could do a whole lesson on maxims of law. They're just fantastic and they're nourishing. I feel like they're nourishing to my soul. And so this is the hierarchy of how the world is set up. Like God set it up this way, whoever you believe the creator to be. And this is all superior to us. And we just were born into this world that's set up this way. And all of this stands above us and is more powerful than us. And then we can cooperate with what is established that stands above us, that our creator created for us, in order to move forward with the path that we feel called to and live out our purpose. And the only thing above us are these universal laws, natural laws, and maxims of laws, what I would call them. And we right here stand above everything else. We are on the land, just as Adam was on the land, and God gave him dominion over the land. And we're right here with our feet on the land. And we are sovereign. And there's no one that gets to impose on us God set up a world where there's consequences, where there's natural law, where we can learn how the world works. We can try out a thing. We can make mistakes. We can learn from our mistakes. We can course correct, and we can grow in wisdom. And it's just incredible that that's the only thing that stands between us and God. There is no higher authority in the truest way of how the world works. And so what we're each trying to do is get back to that place ourselves, invite others around the world to join us in that, and also experience what it means to come together as men and women who are sovereign and in honor, and honoring universal laws, natural laws, maxims of law, not harming others, free to make our own choices so long as we don't somehow harm someone else or take away their right to self-govern. And in that position, with having all things available and open to us and having complete freedom and a complete ability to self-govern, remember that whenever you have freedom, you also have responsibility. And I think it's interesting how often people come along and want to become part of the assembly, and they're not really understanding that until we step up to the plate and we roll up our sleeves and do the work that's necessary, we won't have the freedom that we want, either personally as our own sovereign self or as a community who are all here on this land together. The land that I'm on is called Washington. You're on a different land perhaps. But until we can all work together, honor each other's sovereignty, show up and self-govern, we won't experience the greatest degree of freedom if we're not bringing forth the greatest degree of responsibility. And so we want to be in honor, and we want to show up to fulfill our duty. And that's, being sovereign entails a lot of responsibility. It means we have to learn to self-govern because they never taught us to do that. So if you don't know how to write a claim and you don't know how to bring forward your law, these are all things, right, that are going to have to be learned. And, you know, Anna puts out a lot of articles, and there's so much to learn, and that's part of you self-governing. There's a lot to be responsible for when we self-govern. We also have the option to choose not to self-govern and to be a ward of the state or to be someone's thing, right? So they're happy to turn us into a thing. And that's an option also in life. But as a sovereign, there is nothing higher than us. And so there will be times when one sovereign wants to cooperate with another sovereign, and they'll come together and they'll say, hey, you know what? I would be willing to mow your yard if you would be willing to trim the bushes or whatever, right? And so that two people are maybe coordinating efforts on something like that. Or maybe one person says, if you run a business, and you have a way to make sure that we have, you know, our home and our food and all things met, I will be happy to run a household and keep everything clean and running and whatever. And all, you know, this is kind of like a traditional marriage arrangement or something. And we can come together and make an agreement about how we want to do life. We could have a business that said, I'm a business that, you know, I make widgets, but there's this certain piece of the widget that I need to find someone, if they would please create this segment of what I need for my widget, I'd like to contract with them to make this part of the widget so that I don't have to make that part of the widget, and then I can use it in my widget, right? There's all kinds of ways that contract law comes in, and we are free to contract with one another to our heart's content. And if someone wants to simply be on their land and be private and be to themselves and never contract with everyone and raise all their own food and build their own building and make all their own tools and do everything because that brings them delight in life, they are sovereign and they can live that life. If there was a group of 100 people that said, let's live together in this community and let's, you know, all figure out how we're going to do this and we want to make these agreements, they can do that. So everyone can find the way that they want to live in peace and to their greatest delight and what they're here for their purpose. And they can contract as they do that or not contract. Contracting involves someone makes an offer, someone accepts, and then you have a contract. This becomes super important in understanding some things about how to navigate as Americans, because everything that we need to learn, so much of it has to do with contract. So, and then below that, there's these things called treaties. Now, listen, this hierarchy of laws, I'm not saying this is approved by Anna. I have been told by Terry that there's some things about it that need to be tweaked, but it's something that I found, and it just helps me have a general concept of how the world is actually put together, even if there are some nuances that need to change. So treaties are like the treaties that came out of the Revolutionary War. And those treaties, there was like 13 or 14 of them that were a result of the Revolutionary War, and those led to something called constitutions. This, when it defines constitutions, defines it differently than how Anna defines constitutions. However, I feel like when I bring both of them together, it gives me a good rounded feel for what a constitution is. Anna says a constitution is a power sharing agreement. This right here says the Constitution is laws created by a sovereign. So if you think about it, the men and women that were on Pennsylvania way back in the day, 1776 and 1780, and as this is all coming about, came together and they agreed. They were all sovereigns, and they gave away a portion of their sovereignty so that they could bind together in a community and oversee this vast land called Pennsylvania. So it's created by a sovereign that governs a corporation created by a sovereign. So they were part of Pennsylvania and Maine and Georgia and, the 13 colonies. They were all part of creating the first agreement, the Constitution, where we agreed that we were going to hire, for example, the British territorial government, because the British were known for their naval force, and we needed their protection on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. Anna wrote about that in a recent article about what was happening at sea. If anyone has a question and wants to find that, we can look for that later. And then there are the federal codes. So within those corporations, they create codes. The Pope created something in the 1950s, I think, called the UCC. I think it's the Uniform Commercial Code. And then below that, we have corporations. And the corporations that we hired have their own rules and courts and how they want to have their employees operate. For example, if you work at Burger King, they might tell you what you have to wear. You need to wear black pants, and then I'm going to give you this special shirt you have to wear when you're at Burger King, whatever it is. And you need to show up at 8 o'clock, and maybe if you show up late 3 times, we're going to fire you, right? They have all of these rules and laws and the way things operate. And then if you show up 3 times late, they're documenting it, right? This is all happening on paper. And then when they fire you, then they're going to give you a pink slip, right? But this is all kind of like decided within how that corporation works. And then maybe they have someone that's devoted to like the supervisor or something that's going to hand you the pink slip. Well, the police officers are the law enforcement are the ones within the corporations that were serving within, these agreements. And so that's what the police, the corporate police and the agents, it's kind of like if you go to the mall, you might see mall cops. When I'm driving around town, I've been seeing like this thing called Joe's Patrol for the last few years. And I think that they're like hired security. Recently, a couple weeks ago, I was driving down the road and I saw this thing that said Douglas Properties. I think that's either a developer or a real estate investor that owns a bunch of maybe apartment buildings or something, and they're hiring their own security. I think it's interesting to see all this private security, right? Now, if the mall cops went down the road to the local, the nearby apartment complex and tried to enforce the law over at the apartment complex, then the people at the apartment complex would just look at them with this strange look and say, what are you trying to do? Like, you're a mall cop. You work for the corporation down the road. You don't work for the big apartment complex. You can't come here and hassle the men and women that live at the apartment complex. You're supposed to be at the mall, making sure that the mall is kept safe. So that's really, Anna says, kind of what our police officers, they started out as what she calls Pinkertons. Now, Pinkertons were the police, the law enforcement on the railroads, and railroads are actually interesting as far as jurisdiction goes. They're actually part of international jurisdiction. And in the same way that the British had permission to kind of come into the ports and be on our navigable inland waterways, like the Mississippi River goes up through our country, and that's a navigable inland waterway. We have the Columbia River in Washington that would have been like that. There's dams and things like that nowadays on the Columbia, but essentially, the railways are similar and they're in international jurisdiction. And then there's also postal roadways that are, so there's all of these things that happen with travel or with, railways and roads, and that end up being jurisdictionally interesting and confusing, and maybe able to blur the lines a little bit, so that eventually maybe it was like law enforcement officers, we just didn't realize that they're like mall cops that left the mall and they came over and started harassing us when they had no business harassing us. One of the things, back to this chart, that I like to point out is that we are up here as sovereigns. And really what they did is they put us at the very bottom as employees. They make up this lie that we're employees in their corporation. This happens when we're born and we are unlawfully converted from this high state of being a sovereign, where nothing stands between us and God and complete freedom and responsibility except universal laws, natural laws, and maxims of law. And we were demoted. Anna's used the word denigrated, clear down here to citizens. And she talks about having civil rights and having human rights, and how they were recently trying to denigrate even further. And so we were put way, way, way down here because they did not want us up here overseeing and telling them, you didn't mow the grass the way I asked you to, I'm not going to pay you. And they wanted to access our land, and they wanted to pretend they had general jurisdiction, and they didn't want us to know what general jurisdiction was. All of this. And so the reason I bring you to this is because we're talking about constitutions. And this right here is a constitution. It comes from the sovereign, and there's a contract, and there's this treaty, and out of that, there's an agreement. What Anna defines it as is an agreement. It's a debt sharing agreement. The landowners have land and credit, and they're wealthy, and they're hiring someone to do a job for them. So there's payment to the corporation. Or now they're incorporated. In the beginning, when there was United States, the papal municipal business, and when there was United States of America, those weren't, I think if I remember right, the United States was possibly incorporated, but the United States of America, the British territorial business, was not incorporated. It was never decided that it couldn't be incorporated. In something I was reading today, Anna said, how could they have foreseen the problem that having so many corporations was going to cause someday in the future? But this is the kind of constitution that the three constitutions are, the 1787, 1789, 1790. I'm going to come up here and grab the text tool, and I'm just going to put right next to Constitution here, 1787, 1789, 1790, the three constitutions. And then I'm going to come grab this tool again, and I'm going to come down here. And what they did down here is they made something called a corporate charter. And I'm trying to remember if this one was 1868. If someone remembers, let me know. 1868, it's right here. So what happened here is there was a corporate charter that was created. Let me come back to this. 1868, I hope I got that right. I'm going to take this one and make it a little bit bigger also. I don't know if you learned how to use this tool, but you can use it with PDFs. But essentially, the first three constitutions are something that came from the treaties. This doppelganger, this one is a corporate charter from 1868, And whenever she's talking about this corporate charter, she always refers to this Scottish Commercial Corporation. And she also talks about that it went bankrupt in 1906. And this is also where we get the 14th Amendment, when the slaves were set free in the physical world, but they were enslaved on paper through this 14th Amendment citizen, which is called a, let me see if I can go ahead and do this. This is called a citizen of the United States. Now you'll become used to this because you'll notice that citizen right here is with a lowercase c and then of the United States. This is referring to a papal municipal citizen, and it's going to look like your all caps name. And so that's what this 14th Amendment citizen is about. And whenever the court tries to drag you in there, it's generally going to be your papal municipal slave name. And so you can remember that came from the 14th Amendment. And this fourth constitution is not an actual constitution that was part of an agreement that any Americans made. There was no actual states that were part of this. This was a doppelganger. This is fraud. This is not part of anything that Americans agreed to. And then the British territorial kind of an employee was called a U.S.citizen. By the way, this is on the chart when I like to share that chart with you, the one-page structure. And it says right here, well, I'll go to the one that, no, I actually closed that one. I'll just show you that it says right here, citizen of the United States, that's papal municipal, and U.S.citizen. Now over here in the Federal Republic, we don't have any of these United States citizens. And so where that would fit into this article is that it would have been part of the original Federal Republic right here, and it would have been called a United States citizen. So hopefully that just helps you kind of grasp some things about the constitutions. The fourth constitution, and one of the things I like to touch on with this, I'm going to go back to the chart that has the states on it, if I can find that. Yeah. Does anyone know there's something that Anna refers to called the Titles of Nobility Act, TONA? Does anyone know where TONA fits in? Because if you go do research online, they're going to tell you that there's no TONA in the Constitution. There's no 13th Amendment Titles of Nobility Act. Anyone? Okay, fine. I'll just tell you. So this is part of why it's so important what Anna was saying in this article. I'm going to come back here, back to the beginning, where she's talking about the red herring. It distracts us. It's a non sequitur. We don't even know what we need to bring up. So here's what's going on, is that they're saying that the Titles of Nobility Act isn't part of the Constitution. And you can go read articles about this. And it's one of those things that somebody might bring to you and say, hey, but you know, this whole TONA thing is just a bunch of baloney. It's never really even been a thing. But Anna and her team, they check the public record and it really is a thing. And so where does it fit in? Well, when they say it's not part of the Constitution, they're saying it's not part of the 1868 Constitution. I'm going to come back to this one. It's not part of the corporate constitution. Well, wait a minute. The corporation was either British or it was papal. So like, because it fits into this area, in fact, I think it's the British. Of course, there's no Titles of Nobility Act within that. Who would actually insist, who would have been the men and women who in 1819 decide to vote and say, we don't want British nobility to be allowed to be the president? Who would say that? Anyone? Anyone? By the way, here in this article, this is, it's called Broadcast to All Americans. I don't remember the number of this. This is part 3. It says in 1819, Virginia ratified the titles of nobility to the original federal constitution, which is called the Constitution for the lowercase u United States of America. This first constitution is the one that has anything to do with TONA, because the Americans were saying that if we're going to have a government, we need our government to not be compromised by British nobility. I'm looking for my chart so that I can bring that back up. And so they were saying within this one, we don't want to have any British agents, anyone with a title of nobility. We want none of them serving within this, and they cannot be the president. I did see that someone's hand is up. Did you want to ask a question, or do you want to save it for later?
Yeah, what is the definition of a TONA? I've never heard of that before. I yield.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks for making sure. So TONA stands for Titles of Nobility. And so I went and did, if you go to Anna von Reitz and do a search, you can do a search. When I do a search, I'm going to come to the top here of annavonreitz.com. I'll show you the search engine that I always use is the one that says it's the new search engine. This is taking a long time to go that way. So let me come grab it and bring it up. Okay, right here, there's a search box right here. That's not the one I use. I come down, it says, or use this new search system. And, oh, it's telling me that, hold on, I'm not going to go there yet. I'll show you in a minute. But you can do a search when you go there, and you can search for titles of nobility. I'm going to get a different color and highlight it different. And you can see right here on this article, titles of nobility. And anyone who accepted a title, now the British were really into titles. So you know how we all grew up needing to call our school teachers, you know, Mrs. Jones and Mr. Smith and all of this? That is British. Men and women, American men and women, just go by Brenda or Joe or whatever. And sometimes when I was new on the assembly, I might say, oh, look, it's Mr. So-and-so. And they'd say, don't give me a title, right? And so bar attorneys and esquires and doctors and nurses, and we've got all of these titles. That's a very, very British thing to do. And so we were very untrusting of the British. And we said, anybody that's taking a title of nobility, a bar attorney, we don't want them to hold any public office in the American federal government. And if they did, they would suffer penalties. This is how we know that President Lincoln did not serve within, I'm going to come back here, within the Republic. He was not the president of the States of America. He was the president of the British Territorial because he was a bar attorney. That's British. So he was a bar attorney. And he, by the way, this is the Navy. And there's the Lieber Code, which is like the first time there's an executive order. Executive orders didn't exist before this. And it's a military coup. And we've been under soft military rule ever since. And there's the Lieber Code you can look into. I believe that becomes the Hague Conventions. But yeah, that's what the titles of nobility is. This article is called Broadcast to All Americans, Part 3. I think Part 4 also mentions the titles of nobility, but you can look more into that. Gosh, I was going to be short, but apparently I've just rattled on until 5:10. So anyways, with that, I just want to know if there's any other questions. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. And that way, in stopping the recording, if people want to ask questions after that, I'll accept questions after that. But if anybody wants to ask a question right now as part of the recording, feel free.
The military, this is John Garnacci on Los Angeles.
Yes.
The military that you're talking about with Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War seemed to me that it was comprised of militias. And yet it seems to me also that somehow they had taken over, conscripted the true Americans who were the militiamen, and actually somehow converted them to the territorial government without their knowledge.
Yeah.
Because that's a very powerful factor that is at play even now. Because if you ask our military if they realize that they're part of a territorial government, they would look at you askew because they think that they are part of the American armed forces.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when you realize that they're being paid by this the senior service circle, I think they call it, and that's totally a British agency, it really makes you start to have questions. Why would a British agency be the paymasters for our American armed forces? And so I said all that to say this. It really helps, Christy, for you to go over this because it gives us a much clearer understanding of what happened and what is happening now. So I appreciate it, and I yield.
Yeah, these are the things that took me a while to really piece together. And it was helpful when I found them and kind of each step along the way. I also just remembered that one of the things I was going to show you is that if you go to the handbooks area, which is a place, this handbooks area I go to a lot because that's where the one-page structure of the American government chart is that I showed you guys. But over here on the Jural Assembly Handbook, I'm going to open that because there's some really important information on the constitutions. If we go there, I'm going to put this back to like page 1. And so I can show you the beginning of this. But if you come to the Jural Assembly Handbook, it is 213 pages. And over here, there's the content. So if you click on here, it kind of like tells you the sections. And if you come down to, oh, I think it was 33. Oh, maybe not. Okay, section 30, the constitutions. This is a fantastic place to learn more about the constitutions. And basically she explains that the first constitution was, it was the Constitution of 1787. I'm going to come here. This constitution was actually, I believe she says, ratified by the states. And then, let me see. I was thinking I had pulled this up already. Okay. Yes. And she says as, let me come back here. Okay. She talks about how the original equity contract, the Constitution for the United States of America, was passed in 1878, ratified by the states in 1879. Then she talks about how the second one was created. She says Congress was reseated and acted as the territorial United States Congress. Like she explains in detail here how it happens. And then they passed this one. And then finally, Congress was reseated a third and final time in their municipal United States Congress capacity to write the municipal constitution. And then she gives the name of it. And she says, in conformance with the Jay Treaty. So understand there's a Revolutionary War. There are peace treaties that come out of it, and the constitutions come out from there. And she says, thus, there is one ratification process by which the actual states approve the original equity contract, the Constitution for the United States of America, and the subordinate constitutions were attached as codicils. So I looked up codicils. Actually, I'm going to keep this, I'm not going to keep going on because we're kind of running long here, but you can look up the definition. It's easy. You just highlight it and you come up to like the search bar here and it'll search the internet for you. Approved by Congress, acting first as the territorial Congress and next as the municipal Congress, and further sharing out powers vouchsafed to the states of America under the original equity contract. Remember, when it says states of America, you have to pay attention and go back to the chart, you know, and come back to this again or something similar to this, because we have several versions of it, and remind yourself where that is. One must remember that everything taking place during the adoption of the constitutions is a power sharing agreement between the states operating the original Confederate state of states and two foreign subcontractors, according to the dictates of the peace process and treaties ending the Revolutionary War. They are divvying up the powers being delegated by the actual states to their own state of states and two foreign subcontractors. So anyway, she goes on. This again is in the Jural Assembly Handbook. This is section 47, actual Constitution and Codicils. And there's just some great information in here. Let me see, as unincorporated and lawful businesses, these foreign subcontractors had to be accountable for their behavior, but as incorporated legal franchises. So this is talking, if you look between here, it's talking about how we ended up with incorporated businesses instead of businesses that could be held accountable. But as incorporated, quote unquote, legal franchises of the UK and the Holy See, they enjoyed bankruptcy protection, which motivated them to secretively hypothecate debt. When I think of hypothecating debt, it makes me think of if John Fernacci and I were neighbors and I were to take the information about his car and go to the bank and say, I want a loan on his car. Like, this is what they did. They used assets that weren't their own to create this. They used something else for credit than their own things. Anyways, secretively hypothecate debt against our American assets on the pretext that they were working for us, and then seek bankruptcy protection for themselves while leaving us on the hook to pay off their debts, all conveniently without our actual consent, conscious knowledge or consent. Anyways, this is a fantastic portion of the Jural Assembly Handbook to read. It's section 47. There's some great information here. I want to go ahead and stop and we'll open it up for Q&A. John, thanks for offering your thoughts, and we'll look forward to whatever we cover next week.